Over and over, they chanted,
"Roll for Duarte!
hoping to get their message across
Roll for asylum!
to the United States government.
Duarte! Roll for
These protesters are speaking out on behalf of 23-year-old Ruben Duarte Acosta, a Mexican citizen who was locked up for 2 years in a federal detention center.
Ruben, ¿cómo era vivir en el centro de detención aquí en El Paso?
Ruben agreed to talk to us about his time there, but asked us to conceal his identity.
It
was a horrible experience for me, but I'm sure it's the same for any person who's in there. It took a big toll on my family and I, and we still haven't recovered from it.
But Ruben is not a drug smuggler, a human trafficker, or an illegal alien. He came to America for one reason.
I came asking for protection because my country is unstable. It doesn't offer that freedom, so I decided to seek protection here.
He sought protection, but instead found prison. Ruben was born in Durango, the oldest of 4 children. His father was a professor who spoke out against drug use and encouraged his children to do the same. But soon, a well-known drug cartel caught word of their activities. They wanted to send a message to the entire family.
¿Cómo les amenazaron los narcos a tú y tu familia?
My family and I were threatened with death. My father was kidnapped and taken away for a while. It almost cost us our lives.
Fearing for their lives, Ruben and his family fled to the United States to seek asylum, a process that would allow them to live in the country as refugees. In June of 2007, they arrived in Juarez, eager to leave the dangers of their country behind. But this family, which had already endured so much together, was about to be torn apart. Once they showed up at the Paso del Norte bridge, Ruben was taken into custody at the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Detention Center in El Paso, where he remained. His parents and siblings were sent to an ICE detention center near Austin, where they were released and left the state.
When I was separated from my family, it was very hard for me and for them. We weren't familiar with the situation we were in, and we didn't know what was going to happen to us.
It was hard enough for Ruben to be without his family, but it was just as difficult for him to get accustomed to his new surroundings. He slept in a crowded bunk area, exercised in a yard surrounded by barbed wire fence, worked in a cafeteria for $1 a day. By October of 2007, Ruben was tired of being treated like a criminal. So instead of waiting for his asylum hearing, he decided to go back to Mexico.
I was so stressed from being in there and so desperate to get out. I didn't know what to do. I felt my best choice was to leave and see what I could do from my home country.
But Ruben felt just as isolated living at his aunt's house in Juarez. Because of the drug cartel violence in the city, he was afraid to attend college or even go out in public.
Every day, the situation was getting worse and worse. More deaths were happening around me, more threats being made to my neighbors.
So in March of 2008, Ruben decided to seek asylum for a second time, which meant it was back to the detention center.
Ruben knew that if he wanted to win his freedom, he was going to need some help. So when the detention center provided him with a list of immigration lawyers here in El Paso, he immediately mailed it to his father. Mr. Duarte chose Eduardo Beckett, a lawyer with the Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center, and called to explain his son's plight. Because Ruben was young, a student, and an anti-drug activist, Beckett decided to represent him.
If you're going to ask for asylum, you better be ready for a fight.
So this is Ruben's case right here.
Beckett has worked on hundreds of asylum cases in his career, but he's never seen an injustice like this.
Here's a young man that is doing everything that Americans want their youth to do, is to stand up against drugs, go to school, get an education. Here's this young man asking for asylum, and what does the United States do? We lock him away.
Beckett's first plan of action was to go in front of an immigration judge and make an asylum request on Ruben's behalf. According to U.S. Department of Justice criteria for asylum seekers, Ruben was qualified because he was unable to return to the country of his nationality because of persecution on account of his membership in a particular social group, which in this case was his stance against the drug cartels. But at the hearing, the judge denied Beckett's request, stating Ruben had abandoned his opportunity to seek asylum on the basis of events that happened to him in the past.
That it was his belief that since my client went back to Mexico on his own accord, self-deported himself, he asked to be deported, he basically waived his right to ask for asylum.
6 months passed, and by September of 2008, Eduardo had a new plan: to write a letter to Immigration and Customs Enforcement requesting parole for Ruben, which would allow him to live in the country under federal government supervision. Since Ruben had no criminal record and was not a threat to the community, he was eligible for parole. But after reviewing his case, the field director at the detention center denied that request, saying Ruben did not meet the criteria to be released via parole for humanitarian reasons.
The way that they define humanitarian, it depends on what the field officer thinks humanitarian is. Indirectly, he's saying, I just simply don't want to release your client because I don't like him.
So it was back to the cramped space, barbed wire and cheap labor at the detention center for Ruben. Months passed and he waited for word of a new asylum hearing, waited for parole to be granted after multiple requests were denied. To make matters worse, Ruben's health was on the decline. He made routine visits to the infirmary for skin rashes, knee pains, and other problems. But one day in November of 2009, Ruben received the news he had waited so long to hear. After his 7th request, he was finally granted parole and given the green light to leave the detention center.
En cuanto me lo dijeron, no lo podía creer.
As soon as I heard the news, I could not believe it. I was starting to think it would never happen, but when I left, I felt like a completely different person.
With a renewed sense of hope, Ruben set out to do one more thing: find his family. Several $100s and a 13-hour bus ride later, he was reunited with them at their new home.
¿Cómo te sentías cuando viste tu familia por primera vez?
Cuando vi mi familia por primera vez,
When I saw my family for the first time, we all cried with joy. It was incredible to be with them again. Thank God it finally happened.
Ruben is now starting a new life in the United States and trying to put the events of the past 2 years behind him. While he says his plans for the future are unclear, one thing is for certain: he'll have another shot at asylum when he attends a new hearing later this year. And even though his attorney says his chances are better this time around, Ruben is still skeptical about the process he put so much faith into, but ultimately caused him a great deal of pain and suffering.
y no sé en realidad si
I don't know if it's a good system or a bad system. Since I was incarcerated for such a long time, it takes a toll emotionally, physically, and it can make you mentally insane because of the things you see in there.
Trevor Connor, News Channel 9.